I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank you for your support and your presence during the quarter. I want to especially thank Brian for sharing the teaching duties with me. As you can tell, he's an excellent teacher, and I think he's a good man, and we're very blessed to have them with us. Hopefully, from the study, our faith has been strengthened, and hopefully our resolve to serve God has been deepened. I pray that will be the case, and I pray that we've just whetted your appetite for wanting to go back and be reminded of the important truths that we've found in the Gospel of Luke. Last week, as we were ending, we were noting the triumphal entry. We saw how that some of the Pharisees wanted Jesus to rebuke the disciples from calling out. And Jesus said, I tell you, if these become silent, the stones will cry out. Who Jesus is, the praise he deserves, the glory that ought to be shouted out and given, that even if men won't give it, that creation would step forward and praise the Lord. And I'm just going to kind of go from section to section quickly. Hopefully you read these passages or you're familiar with them. So as Jesus approaches Jerusalem, he looks at the city, he sees the city, and it says that he wept. Same idea you have when he went to the grave of Lazarus, and he saw the sorrow of the people and how they were weeping, and he wept, it says. And that's the case here, that he wept over Jerusalem because he knew what was coming, what was going to happen. As he gets into the city, the first thing that he does that we're told about is he cleanses the temple. And this is actually the second cleansing. The first cleansing happened as he began his ministry in John chapter 2. But the same thing is going to occur here. But then I want you to notice what is said in verse 47 and verse 48. Dan, would you mind reading those two verses, chapter 19, 47 and 48?
And he was teaching daily in the temple. The chief priests and the scribes and the principal men of the people were seeking to destroy him, but they did not find anything they could do, for all the people were hanging on his words.
Okay. The Jewish leadership knew what they wanted to do. They actually wanted to kill him. And Jesus had tried to tell his apostles several times as they approached Jerusalem about what was going to happen. Had that message really sunk in with them? Did they understand what he was saying? If you look back at chapter 18 in the book, and beginning in verse 31, he took the 12 aside. This is chapter 18, verse 31. Took them aside, said, Behold, we're going up to Jerusalem. All things which are written, that's an important idea to keep as you look at the closing chapters of Luke. All things that are written through the prophets about the Son of Man will be accomplished. For he'll be handed over to the Gentiles, he'll be mocked and mistreated and spit upon. And after they have scourged him, they will kill him, and the third day he will rise again. Then notice what it says in verse 34. But the disciples understood none of these things. And the meaning of this statement was hidden from them, and they did not comprehend the things that were said. So they are clueless about what's going to take place. But as we've noted here in verse 47 and 48 of chapter 19, the chief priests, the scribes, the leading men, they want to destroy him. All right, any comments at all? Chapter 20 then, and just going to go over some of these things very quickly. He's asked by what authority he did these things, meaning the cleansing of the temple. He said, I'll answer if you'll answer me a question. He said, the baptism of John, was it of heaven or from men? And they knew that either way they answered that, they were going to be in trouble. And so they would not answer, and he said, then I'm not going to answer your question. And then we have what is an important parable. And Mickey, would you mind reading in Luke 20, verses 9 through 18?
9 through 18.
Yep.
And he began to speak unto the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard and let it out to husbandmen and went into another country for a long time. And at the season he sent unto the husbandman a servant, that they should give him of the fruit of the vineyard. But the husbandman beat him and sent him away empty. And he sent yet another servant, and him also they beat, and handled him shamefully, and sent him away empty. And he sent yet a third, and him also they wounded, and cast him forth. And the Lord of the vineyard said, What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. It may be they will reverence him. But when the husbandmen saw him, they reasoned one with another, saying, This is the heir, let us kill him, that the inheritance may be ours. And they cast him forth out of the vineyard, and killed him. What therefore will the Lord of the vineyard do unto them? He will come and destroy these husbandmen, and will give the vineyard unto others. And when they heard it, they said, God forbid. But he looked upon them and said, What then is this that is written? The stone which the builders rejected, the same was made the head of the corner. Every one that falleth on that stone shall be broken to pieces, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it will scatter him as dust.
Okay. Do you think that you understand probably what Jesus is talking about here in this parable? Is this a difficult parable, do you think? And who was he undoubtedly talking about as the evil vine growers that would not respect the messengers, would not respect the Son?
Verse 19 says it's the scribes and the chief priests.
Yes, would you read verse 19 and verse 20?
The scribes and the chief priests sought to lay hands on him at that very hour, for they perceived that he had told this parable against them, but they feared the people. So they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be sincere, so that they might catch him in something he said, so as to deliver him to the authority and jurisdiction of the governor.
Okay. They couldn't help but get that he had to be talking about them. And it just caused them to even be more angry with him. They want to find a way to get him to accuse himself in his words. And so even though they come to him, or they send some to him, flattering him and acting like we really want to know the truth about these matters. And so there's a couple of questions that are posed. What are the questions that are posed? Do you recall here? First of all, is it okay to pay taxes? What did Jesus say? Yeah, render to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. The one question they ask that gets more of our attention is what one? That the Sadducees especially were trying to trick him. They thought they were presenting a case that he just couldn't weave his way through what they were saying. Somebody tell me about that. Keith, you remember what the parable was, or what the situation was?
In verse 20, or in chapter 20?
Yeah.
About a woman who was married and her husband dies, and then the next brother dies, and the brother dies, and the brother dies.
Yeah.
Whose would she be in heaven?
Yeah. That was part of God's law. If a man died and there was no child, then the duty of the next brother was to marry her. Well, he died. And then the next brother died. And you've got this whole line of brothers that die. And so they think, well, here's a question he'll never be able to ask. In the resurrection, whose wife is he going to be? And would somebody read verses 34 through 38? Riley, could you read those for us? And we see what the answer was that Jesus gave.
Jesus answered and said to them, The sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, for those who are accounted worthy to attain that age, and the resurrection from the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage, nor when they die anymore, for they are equal to the angels and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. But even Moses showed in the burning bush passage that the dead are raised, when he called the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. For he is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for all to live for him.
Yeah. It's hard for us to conceive of the resurrection in some ways, isn't it? Isn't it? I think it is. What happens to our body when it's buried or after our spirit leaves it? Decomposes. And we're trying to figure out, how is that going to work? Is God going to get... What is the answer to that? A brief answer to that. A new body. Not talking about the same kind of body. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. All right. Any comments here? Otherwise, I want to jump down to chapter 21. Any comments here? In chapter 21, I'm going to pass over some of the things that are here. The widow's mite is the first thing that we read about. It's a simple lesson. I think most of us are familiar with it. We don't need a lot of help with that. But then as you go a little bit further down, you find that Jesus speaks some difficult things about the Son of Man returning. And we mentioned this briefly in a previous class. And I don't want to take a lot of time looking at it. But look at a couple of verses, and it will help us to maybe get kind of an idea of what Jesus is talking about. Beginning in verse 10, he says, "Then he continued by saying to them, 'Nation will rise up against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes in various places, plagues and famines. There will be terrors and great signs from heaven.'" He says, here's some terrible things that are going to occur and take place. Verse 12, "But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and will persecute you and deliver you to the synagogues and the prisons, bringing you before kings and governors for my name's sake." Persecution is coming. Especially there's persecution that's coming for the apostles and for those that would be outspoken about Jesus and who he was. Now I'm going to jump farther down. Verse 20. He says, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near." What should that bring to our mind that he's talking about? The desolation of Jerusalem. Yeah, the destruction by the Romans. He says in verse 22, "Because these are days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled." And then as you come down to verse 27, he says, "Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. But when these things begin to take place, straighten up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." If you jump down, he gives a parable about a fig tree. But he says in verse 31, "So you also, when you see these things happening, recognize the kingdom of God is near. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place or take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." Talking about his coming in this destruction of Jerusalem in this passage. Not talking about his coming at the end of time. What do you think it means when he mentions the word kingdom here? When you see these things happening, recognize that the kingdom of God is near. It's kind of a difficult idea in some ways to us because of what we think about the kingdom. What do you think it means? Yes, sir?
As much as there was a general growth during the beginning stages of Christianity, after the destruction of Jerusalem, there were so many Israelites who were spread out, and that really spread the word of the message of God, and that really bolstered the numbers of God's kingdom.
Okay. It's a little bit like what Paul says in the book of Romans. Trying to think of the passage, Mickey, is it in chapter 11 that he talks about Well, I don't have time this morning to get off on that. But yeah, the idea is that there's going to be really an explosion, as much as there has been since the disciples were scattered by the persecution of Saul. There's even going to be more opportunity that's going to come about. It's not meant to say, okay, the kingdom hasn't happened yet. It has happened with the death of Jesus upon the cross and his resurrection. It has happened. Okay, any other comments? I know there's probably a lot of, Jim?
Can we take a minute and just explain why this is not talking about the end of the world?
Because you will not pass away. This generation will not. Yeah. 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 No. Yeah, did you all hear Jim's point? And doesn't that make sense, what he's saying? Is it, huh?
If I may.
Yeah.
The whole thing is set up with a question in verse 5. Or it's a question in Matthew's version of the story, but here it's just a statement. They were speaking of the temple and how it was adorned with noble stones and offerings, and he starts talking about the temple, and all this will be thrown down.
Yeah.
And everything else that to Jim's point, everything else he says is to clarify and add gravity to that.
Yeah. That idea of the disciples and the stones, the temple, that's referred to in another passage in Luke. Jesus refers to this more than once in going through here. But yes, that's exactly right. If there were enough interest, I know the elders would be glad to have a class sometime or a presentation that goes into this a little bit deeper. But we don't have time for that this morning. Any comments? Any other comments? Anything here? So let's go ahead and jump down then to chapter 22. And let's read verses 1 through 5. Ashley, would you read verses 1 through 5?
Sure. Reading from the ESV. Now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called the Passover, and the chief priests and scribes were seeking how to put him to death, for they feared the people. Then Satan entered into Judas, called Iscariot, who was of the number of the 12. He went away and conferred with the chief priests and officers how he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money.
Okay. So here Judas enters into this. And who does it say has really put the idea in his head? Well, Satan. Now, do you think that this was Satan acting in a different way than he may act with us? No, I don't think so either. Satan is always talking to us and always putting things in our head, in our mind, of things that we might do. And Judas did not resist him, did he? And he goes and he's able to make an arrangement. Let's look at verses 7 and 8. Rob Phipps, would you read that?
Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. So Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat it." They said to him, "Where will you have us prepare it?" He said to them, "Behold, when you have entered the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him into the house that he enters."
All right. Sounds a little bit unusual, doesn't it? That what's going to happen is there's going to be somebody that almost he's ready for these men to approach him about this matter. But they go. In Rusty's class on Wednesday night, he told us about when they lived in Chicago, that they were part of a group that studied Hebrew and tried to speak Hebrew. and he told about going to a Passover service and some of the things take place. It's very, very interesting. So we make a big mistake if we fail to see a connection here between the Passover and the Lord being offered as a sacrifice. What did they sacrifice for the Passover? An unblemished lamb. Could be a kid, could be a goat. Unblemished, perfect in every way, physically. And of course, who's our Passover lamb? And that's what John the Baptist called him. Yeah, the Lamb of God, Jesus Christ. As you come down here a little bit further, and I'm sorry to have to rush through this, but he's going to eat the Passover with them. What does he institute during the taking of the Passover? That's important to us, the Lord's Supper. And again, if we had more time, it'd be good for us to discuss that and look into that a little bit more. Any comments about this at all? Anything that you want to mention or bring up? Yeah. Yeah.
Microphone box.
Yes. Am I not doing something?
Can I just see the box part of it?
Yeah.
I'll let you keep going on.
Yeah. Okay. I don't really want to discuss this section beginning in verse 24. It's an argument, it's a dispute, we might say, among the disciples. What was their chief thing that they disagreed with each other about that came up again and again? Who was going to be the greatest in the kingdom? And what is the answer to that question? Who is the greatest in the kingdom? Okay. The one that serves. The one that serves. You think you got it? Thank you very much. Let's read about them going into the Garden of Gethsemane. Jean, do you mind reading? Would you read in chapter 22, verses 39 through 46?
46.
Yeah.
And he came out and went, as it was his custom, to the Mount of Olives. And the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if you are willing to remove this cup from me, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. And his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he arose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation."
All right, we realize that this is one of three synoptic gospels, and that the gospels differ somewhat in what takes place here, what is said here. Jesus came several times to the apostles and found them sleeping. And he almost seems to kind of rebuke them. You know, could you not be here for me, in a sense, is what he's saying, just for a little while? And there seems to be this sense of disappointment that he felt that at such a critical hour that they would kind of not be there, that they would not be present here. So in all of the Gospels, we see the complete story. We're just looking at what Luke says, what he tells us. Any comment here about this at all? What was he praying about? What did he pray for? Yeah, and what is this cup? Okay, the anguish and suffering that was going to come. And I'm trying to think of the passage in Hebrews. I think it's chapter 5, maybe chapter 4. Do you know that by heart, or can you? Yeah. The agony that Jesus went through was so real that Luke tries to describe it. And what does he say about it? It was like drops of blood. He was in such straining so much in this moment. What does the Hebrew writer say?
It says, who in the days of his flesh, having offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and having been heard for his godly sorrow.
Yeah. He was sorrowing deeply. He was shedding tears before the Lord. He did not choose to go through this if what?
It wasn't his will.
Yeah, if there was another way and it wasn't God's will. But what did Jesus resolutely say at the end of those petitions to God? Nevertheless, thy will be done. Any other comments here? Anything at all? Anything? All right. Sorry that we're hurrying. So then you have the arrest of Jesus that takes place. And it's interesting the way that the Gospel of John portrays it. There's this group that come. Judas is kind of leading them, sort of. He knows where Jesus is at. And what does Jesus do? He goes out to them. And do you remember the question that he asked them? It says, who do you seek? Who do you seek? And what happened on that occasion? He asked them a couple of times, who do you seek? They lost their courage, it almost seems like. They dropped back. They're kind of taken by surprise. They came to surprise him. They're kind of taken by surprise. And they drop back. But notice in Luke's account what happens. Who draws the sword here and what happens? I don't think it mentions who drew the sword. It's Peter. And he swings the sword. And we can imagine he meant to take his head off. But he caught the ear, took off the ear of one of the servants of the high priest. And what did Jesus do about that? Of course, no, that's not how this is going to end. But notice what he says to them. Kira, do you mind reading verse 53 of chapter 22? All right. I was with you in the temple daily. You could have arrested me anytime, but you didn't. But now, in the darkness, the late hours or the early hours of the morning, you've done it. And so we have the arrest of Jesus. And this is when what Jesus has said to Peter takes place. Jesus had said to Peter, Satan has asked for you, that he might sift you, that he might try you. And here we find that Peter is recognized by some, but he will not admit that he's one of the disciples, and he denies that. All right, going to do a lot of reading in these last 15 minutes that we have. I need somebody to read verses 66. Ethan, would you read for me verses 66 through verse 71.
When day came, the assembly of the elders of the people gathered together, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away to their council, and they said, If you are the Christ, tell us. But he said to them, If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God. So they all said, Are you the Son of God then? And he said to them, You say that I am. Then they said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips."
All right. They first took him to the house of the chief priest. And there's more information that's included when you look at all the Gospels and compare what's happened. But from there, he's taken to where there's a gathering of the council. And this is when they have reached their verdict, basically. Some of you have probably read some things that people have written about, was this lawful? Was this in keeping really with Jewish law, the way that they handled this? And obviously, we all can say, no, of course not. Of course not. Comments at all about this? So now he's going to be brought before Pilate. And let's look at chapter 23. Let's look at, let me see my notes here, where I thought might be a good spot. Let's look at verses 1 through 5. Caitlin, would you like to read? Yeah. Chapter 23, 1 through 5.
Then the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no guilt in this man." But they were urgent, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea from Galilee even to this place."
All right. The Jews didn't have the power to do what, so far as Jesus was concerned? To execute him. That's got to be something that the Romans decide needs to be done. And what is Pilate's verdict here about the situation? He's not guilty. He's not guilty. Brian, would you mind reading verses 6 through 12?
When Pilate heard it, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself was also in Jerusalem at that time. Now Herod was very glad when he saw Jesus, for he wanted to see him for a long time, because he had been hearing about him and was hoping to see some sign performed by him. And when he questioned him at some length, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and the scribes were standing there, accusing him vehemently. And Herod with his soldiers, after treating him with contempt and mocking him, dressed him in a gorgeous robe and sent him back to Pilate. Now Herod and Pilate became friends with one another that very day, for before they had been enemies with each other.
So the Herod family, if we had time, we could talk about who's related to who and which one we're talking about. We don't have time for that this morning. But Herod's verdict is exactly the same as Pilate's. No, he's an innocent man. I don't find anything here to condemn him for. Keith, would you read verses 20, I think it's verse 13, and read all the way down through verse 25.
13 through 25 of chapter 23.
Mm-hmm.
Pilate then called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who is misleading the people, and after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish and release him." But they all cried out together, "Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, a man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city, and for murder." Pilate addressed them once more, desiring to release Jesus. But they kept shouting, "Crucify, crucify him." A third time he said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no guilt deserving death. I will therefore punish and release him." But they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate decided that their demand should be granted. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, for whom they asked, but
he delivered Jesus over to their will.
All right. We see what a weakling that Pilate is. He has no spine. He's not going to go with what his conscience tells him. What his wife had even suggested to him in another gospel, he goes ahead. What do we know that he does? I think it's in the Gospel of John about this matter. Takes a basin of water. I'm not involved in this. I'm innocent of this. You go ahead and take him, but I'm done with it. There's no guilt that comes to me. Going to jump over, because of time, to this next short section about the cross and how that Simon of Cyrene has to be brought in to help Jesus. Mike Hudgens, would you mind reading, beginning with verse 33 in chapter 23, and read through verse 38.
And when they had come to the place called Calvary, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And they divided his garments and cast lots, and the people stood looking on. But even the rulers with them sneered, saying, He saved others, let him save himself if he is the Christ, the chosen of God. The soldiers also mocked him, coming and offering him sour wine, and saying, If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. And an inscription also was written over him in letters in Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, This is the King of the Jews.
Okay. Jumping down to verse 44, it was now about the 6th hour. Darkness fell over the whole land until the 9th hour, because the sun was obscured, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. And Jesus, crying out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said that, he breathed his last. Now when the centurion saw what had happened, he began praising God, saying, Certainly this man was innocent. And all the crowds that came together for this spectacle, when they observed what had happened, they began to return, beating their breasts. And all his acquaintances and the women who accompanied him from Galilee were standing at a distance, seeing these things. Don't ring the bell, if you don't mind, till I signal you to. We're going to go a minute or two over. This is the end of the class. Joseph comes to Pilate. He asks for his body. The women are observing this. Chapter 24, on the first day of the week at early dawn, they came to the tomb, bringing the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. When they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. Now again, you look at different accounts, you'll find more information that is given. They were perplexed about this. Behold, two men suddenly stood near in dazzling clothing. The women were terrified. They bowed their faces to the ground. The men said to them, Why do you seek the living one among the dead? He is not here, but he is risen. Remember how he spoke to you while he was still in Galilee, saying that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the third day rise again. And they remembered his words. What happens when they go to the 11 to tell them about this? They didn't believe. They didn't believe. But who then gets up and goes to the grave? Yeah, Peter and John go. And we're told about an incident on the road to Emmaus where some men are talking. Suddenly another individual joins them. They don't realize it. It's Jesus. And they begin to tell him about what had happened in Jerusalem. And we thought this might be the Messiah, basically. And as you come down toward the end of that discussion Jesus had with them, verse 25, he said, O foolish men, slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and enter into his glory? Then beginning with Moses, with all the prophets, he explained to them the things concerning him in all the scriptures. We don't have time to finish reading the text here. I hope that you will take the time to do that and notice. But one of the points that he made to these men on their way to Emmaus, one of the points that he very strongly makes to the 11 is that all things had to be fulfilled that were spoken of him. All of those things had to take place. Sorry, we missed one Sunday because of a snowstorm, and we had to rush through the ending, and I apologize for that. This is something that needs to be read by us every year. We need to be familiar with the Gospels. This is where our faith in Jesus comes from, is the Gospel accounts. We need to teach this to our children. We need to know these events. We need to know the order of these events. If we're studying it frequently, that should naturally happen. But anyway, we're very thankful for our Lord Jesus' willingness to go to the cross, to die for him, and we rejoice that he's made it possible that we can be his people.